Good evening, everyone. I'm Rebecca Endy Lichtenberg, Studio's Managing Director, and I wanted to welcome you and say thank you for tuning in tonight. This is the inside look for our fourth show in our digital season, but it is the first show that has had music and choreography, so we are really excited to give you this inside look so that you're excited to tune in when the recording drops on May 21st. To all of you who are with us tonight, thank you for sticking with us as our stages have been dark, for supporting us, and for making this digital season possible. We're just really grateful that you all have continued to be part of our studio family. I am going to introduce our artistic director, David Muse, and director Psalmayene 24 to talk about flow.
Hello, thanks, Rebecca. Hey there, Psalm.
Hey, thanks for
right. So, everybody, Psalm and I are going to chit chat for a little bit, and then we're going to invite Nick the Wanda on, who did the sort of sound and live DJ experience for Flow. So, Psalm, you're a little frozen on my screen. Can you hear me?
Oh, hey. All right. I'll see.
Hey.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, that's a little better.
Okay.
Good. Okay.
Cool. Technology. This is the new world that we're in,
I know, right? All right. So, well, let's start by just catching everybody up on sort of where you are and we are in the process, right? So you have had your rehearsals and your filming. That's all wrapped.
Yep.
Right. And so now you and the video team are going to be working on your edit.
Exactly.
Yeah. Have you seen it yet?
I've seen like a rough cut and then a second cut. Yeah, so I've seen like most of it, and I'm excited. It's looking great. It's feeling great. So now we're in the part of the process where the sound editor, Matt Nielsen, actually is working on the sound edit and mixing as we speak. So like earlier today, we were going back and forth a little bit and sending notes and looping Nick into those conversations and all of that. So this is certainly a different process than theater making for sure. The edit is just as crucial, if not more crucial, than the capture of the actual art.
Yeah.
So yeah.
All right. So if we can, let's reverse a whole lot. Let's talk about this play for a second. And I wonder if we can sort of, all right, well, so there's this thing, there's this genre now that we call hip hop theater that's been around long enough that one can talk about a kind of canon of hip hop theater.
You can now. Yeah.
Give us a couple minutes about, how do you describe hip hop theater? And then where do you orient willpower and flow in that kind of universe?
Sure. So sort of the broadest and most accepted definition of hip hop theater is theater by, for, and about the hip hop generation. So that's sort of the broad definition of the genre. I have a different definition that is veers more towards form. So for me, hip hop theater is relevant experimental theater that uses the performative elements of hip hop as a primary storytelling device. So my definition sort of is little, sort of narrows in a little bit more. But it certainly includes a lot of the works that would be considered under the first definition. This piece, Flow, is one of the classics of the genre and sort of one of the first solo pieces to really gain a certain amount of attention. And, you know, that's partly just because of the brilliance of the writing, who the creators are. So Will Power is a pioneer of the genre. He wrote it, as we know, and he performed in the original production. Danny Hock directed the original production. And he is not only an artist, like a pioneering artist, but he's also one of sort of the visionaries behind the genre. He co-founded the New York City Hip Hop Theater Festival, and his early solo works were really just great pieces that melded hip hop into theater in ways that we hadn't quite seen before. And it's also interesting too, because this is a Jewish cat from Queens. So already he's sort of upending people's stereotypical notions of who is really involved in hip hop. Being from New York, I sort of grew up in a community that was very racially diverse. So it wasn't entirely unusual to see, you know, Asian cats who were hip hop to the bone, you know, a Jewish cat like Danny, who was hip hop, of course, Latino brothers and sisters who were really part of that that wave of young people who created hip hop and then also started to innovate in the hip hop theater genre as well. But yeah, this piece is just one of those, like, this is like hip hop's Death of a Salesman. Like it's a classic piece, and it's a piece that I think it's really special that Studio is doing this piece again, because it was produced in the 2004-5 season. Will came to DC and did that production, and I actually saw that production. Nick saw that production, and he can tell you a cool story about like that being the first date that he and his wife went on and all. I mean, so there's sort of like a lot of history connected to that piece, and sort of some cool energy around studios producing it then and then producing it now. And I mean, with Justin Weeks being in the piece, being the star of the piece, that's special too for DC audiences to see Justin on stage again. He's sort of like a beloved son of our community, and this is a great showcase for him. And in a way, he's sort of like taking the baton. Like, I look at Justin as like the next generation of hip hop theater artist. I mean, he's also, you know, a pure actor, and he's writing now as well. But I also look at him as being cut from the same cloth as a lot of the early hip hop theater artists. So yeah, man, it's been quite a ride so far, and I can't wait until this thing is finished and we put it out into the world.
Yeah. So you start, like, in terms of talking about Justin and next generation, and you sort of started to talk about the next thing I'm curious to ask you about, which, I mean, it feels to me like you had two big and difficult projects when I called you up and said, hey, how about Flow? One is like figuring out how to translate this piece of hip hop theater from 2003 and make sense of it today. And then to take a thing that was written to be performed live in the theater and translate it to film. So do you want to talk about each of those things and how you sort of thought about it and unpacked it and approached it?
Yeah. So yeah, I'll talk about Well, since it's a classic, I looked at it and said, well, do we want to update it? How do we want to really make it feel like it's, you know, specifically living in 2021? And I said, no, actually, I think we can.
So I'm afraid we've lost you. I don't know if you can hear us, but I just lost your sound and your video froze. We'll give him just a minute to see if he can sort himself out. I guess while we're waiting, do we have Nick backstage? We can go ahead and introduce him. That was going to happen a little bit later, but hello, sir.
Hello, how you doing, David?
I'm doing good. Thanks.
This is theater.
I know, right? I know. So we'll talk a little bit about your relationship with Psalm, how you guys know each other, what you've worked on. I know this, you know, you guys go back.
So it's funny, people who don't know our dynamic, I kind of like to think of us as like Jay-Z and Kanye almost, with Psalm being Jay-Z. I've never used this analogy around Psalm, but I thought about it. But I'm talking about Jay-Z and Kanye 10 years ago, because obviously Kanye's in a different space right now.
Word up.
Being that I handle a lot of the production and Kanye is still able to write and spit, with Psalm, I see that he's very collected and focused and in depth with his writing, which is what I get from somebody like Jay-Z, where I'm more of a jack of all trades. And like I said, I handle music and production side and DJing. So I think it's that intersection that me and Psalm have that translates into authenticity, which is a big thing in hip hop. Like just being authentic is what makes the piece, whether it's theater or just making music in general. The authenticity is what translates into good hip hop.
Yeah.
So we found that balance.
And this is just to, you know, because not everybody knows what's going on here. This isn't kind of like, you know, as far as theater goes, a kind of like normal theater assignment, because you're like part of the production, right? You're there, you're live, so tell it, like, for people who don't really know what we're talking about, tell them what it is and what you did.
It's interesting since we're doing hip hop theater, and this follows the journey of a character named Will, who's a storyteller. He's accompanied by a DJ. So it's the DJ who's providing the sound effects and the backbone for him telling this story and going through it. So if you look at all the classic hip hops, I'm talking Eric B. and Rakim, you can even go more modern, Snoop Dogg and Dr. Dre. There's always a storyteller, DJ, musician background. So we tried to translate that with flow, because that's essentially the story. So I had to wear many hats. I sound designed it. I DJ'd in it right behind Justin as well. And then I also composed the music. So it's very safe to say I will not be doing this again anytime soon. But I love studio theater and Psalm for actually helping me get outside that box, because now I know I can do it again. So that's great. But.
And you also acted in it. Don't forget that. So that was four acts.
I didn't say anything. Did you notice?
Which is actually one thing that, like, I've been thinking about for a while, because like a lot of hip hop theater pieces will put like a DJ like on stage, and the theater artist in me is always like, well, but how is their presence justified? What are they doing? Like, can't we just do that with sound design? So like for a production like this, having Nick on stage is like, oh, well, you can't just press buttons, because we could have like the stage manager press cues.
Sound 22, go.
Right. So we actually incorporated Nick as like characters in the play, and then his presence also gives us that call and response ritual feel that you know, how can we do that in a film? So that was sort of a way for us to solve that problem, is to say we have the DJ, and then we can, you know, Nick can sort of function as like a proxy for the audience now. So I think it works. And Nick's scream, I mean, his screen presence, man, is like mwah, like very natural, very charismatic. You know what I mean? So
But you
that
know,
was also sort of like a revelation also.
it totally goes to what I was just saying a minute ago, David. It's about that authenticity. So even if I don't have a lot of experience, if you give that 100%, almost that grit, you almost can't deny it. So I appreciate that song. Thank you.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, man. So yeah.
Well, so before we lost you, you were in the middle of, or actually at the beginning of starting to talk about this play and now and this play and video. So
Yeah. So like so the idea is to treat it, or we treat it like a period piece. So it is early 2000s, not too long after the tragic events of 9/11. So that is when the play occurs. But even in terms of costume design and like the soundscape of the play, we really wanted to lean into a design that sort of could certainly work in 2003, but that could also translate in 2020. So it does sort of give it like a timeless feel, but we were very much intentionally saying, no, this is like 2003 or whatever. And then in terms of filming it, I mean, film is pretty much a new medium for me as an artist. So that's something that I had to, you know, I'm still learning a lot about it and learning about like best practices and sort of how best to communicate with editors. And I mean, I just thought about something today, like, man, I should have watched like the dailies like after each day. But I mean, we had like a 2-day shoot and didn't have much time. It was so late, and then we had to get up pretty, you know, early the next day. But if we had more time, I would have watched what we shot the first day and then been just a little bit more prepared for the second day. But again, this is all, you know, as an artist who's, you know, sort of stepping into a new field, you have to, you know, say, well, you'll learn a lot. You can't be too hard on yourself, but then you bring with you everything that you carry as a theater artist. So your attention to detail, and I mean, there's still acting considerations that you have to think about, and composition, even if that's just on screen, and sort of what is the audience seeing. That's a little bit easier as a filmmaker, because now the gaze is really your gaze, the gaze of the camera operator, and the gaze of the editor. So you're able to really be really specific about what the audience sees. So in that way, it sort of democratizes the audience in a really cool way. There are no bad seats. Everybody has the same view now. So that's one thing that I really love about this process.
Yeah, well, I hear you. It was like the first time for me too. You've had a few of these this year, right? I know you've. I can think of 3 or 4 off the top of my head.
Yeah, and with each project, you learn something new. So we did a project, and actually Nick was a part of that. Tony Thomas, who did the choreography, was also a part of the arena stage piece, and so was Justin. So that was helpful because we had like a shared sort of experience. Most of that was shot outdoors, so those challenges were different. But what remains is, when an obstacle comes up, you have to know how to adjust. If there's a roadblock, how do you respond to it? And how do you, like our last film, there was a literal roadblock one day. We literally could not get to like past the street we were supposed to go on, so we had to choose a different location. So that, for me, that was like a metaphor for not only filmmaking, but like theater making and art making in general. Like, how do you respond to obstacles and then make it work and know that there's hopefully a room behind it, and if you're creative, things can work even better.
Yeah.
Just like
Well,
technological obstacles.
I know, like exactly, like right now. But I do have to say, like, you're frozen, but it's a pretty good freeze.
Okay. Is it back?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
The most
cool.
hip hop freeze ever.
So, all right, for both of you, but kind of for you, Nick. Like, I'm curious to hear you talk about how you entered into the piece, sort of creatively, like in terms of, inspiration and like how you hear it, and then also practically, because it's like not a kind of normal sound design.
Well, I was very fortunate, as Sam mentioned, to actually see Flo. So I think that helped as well, because I had a understanding of willpower and just like the way he works with his words in the piece. So I noticed that after watching the show, or just in general, a lot of times as a DJ, I always say this. I DJ outside of doing sound design, but when I DJ, it's either 50% of the people wear background music, and then the other 50% is actually listening to us and on that journey and on that ride. So when it comes to theater, I think of the same thing. A lot of people are actually focusing on the main character's words and not really leaning into the background sounds per se. And then you have other who look at it as a component working together. So going into it, I wanted to make music that wasn't so distracting per se, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, totally.
Focus more on the words, but you still got the groove that this is definitely a hip hop theater piece. So that was definitely my top inspiration going into. Also, being that Willpower's from California. Well, originally he when he was doing this piece, he was in the Bay Area. So a lot of Bay Area hip hop influenced me, but it's really interesting because groups like I don't know if you're familiar, but the Far Side, Hieroglyphics. I point them out specifically because even though they were from the West Coast, they were borderless. You didn't listen to them and necessarily thought, oh, those are West Coast rappers. They're just like Snoop. They're just like, instead, they almost had East Coast aesthetics. You can like them to a Public Enemy or some other group that was on the East Coast. So I love that that we were able to translate a more world hip hop feel as far as it feeling confined in a box. Like, oh, this sounds straight West Coast. Tupac is about to come out or Biggie's down the street. I didn't really want it like that per se, but more so, like I said, the co-star, the backing track. So that's why it worked out good that I was actually the DJ, because I was able to play DJ to Justin's strong lead. But the inspiration is definitely from those West Coast groups who bordered genres, so to speak, and as well, like I said, just the old school griots and poetries. I remember what was the popular New York house? Was it New Yorican?
Oh
Cafe?
yeah.
But if you ever been there or heard of it, they would have somebody playing drums behind you, or like there'd be a slight beatbox if somebody wanted to take it real hip hop. So keeping that in tune, like having something that gives the character an edge, especially since Justin plays 15 plus characters. So how many times can I add audio to not make it seem repetitive or just not that energy? So sorry, I know that was long winded, but that was definitely the inspiration.
And all right, so you like, you're in the room, Tony's in the room, Justin's in the room, Psalm's in the room. Like, who's the leader? Do you know what I mean? Like, did you find yourself, like, had you made the music and it was like, here it is, and they're kind of like figuring out how to go? Or do you know what I mean?
It sounds very cliche, but since me, Psalm, and Tony have worked together before, it's more of a what's the word I'm looking for, Psalm? More like I don't want to just say collaboration, because it's more like we're definitely bouncing the energy off each other. Symbiotic?
Yeah. Yeah, symbiotic relationship is
It's almost
good.
like one works without the other. I'm playing music, therefore that makes Tony move, therefore that makes Song rap and write. So it's literally encompassing the elements of hip hop. And once again, to go back to my byline, that's what creates that authenticity. So getting in the room and me just playing music, like in the beginning of the show, I would play like warm up music, or we would work on stuff that Justin wanted to go over. And just hearing it allowed Psalm and Tony to touch base and say, you know what? It'd be better if you did movement across here. I like when you did this, Nick. Could you scratch here? So it was more like feeding off each other, almost like a cipher, which we will get into once you see the actual play itself, because that's a big component too. Just people getting together to share their art, for those who aren't familiar with a cipher.
And I'll say that even in terms of Nick's role and his contributions to the process, even are greater than just like what you hear, and even his work as sound designer, composer. In rehearsals, he's playing like a music set basically to get, and what it does is it fuses the room. It infuses the room with this sort of gets us ready to create, and it gets us in a creative mind that is very rooted in sort of hip hop culture. So that's like another thing that Nick brings to the table, and at that point he's the leader, because he's basically creating the mood in the room, you know what I'm saying? So if he plays a Biggie song, he knows what that's going to do to the body, or if he plays Far Side or Tribe Called Quest, he also knows that the mood is going to shift with that. So yes, it was just a great process from top to bottom, really.
And to add to that, true hip hop is borderless, because even besides that, you got to remember the original hip hop was very punk. It was linked with the punk scene. So I even played like Red Hot Chili Peppers, Under the Bridge.
Yeah.
So it wasn't just 100% hip hop, because you have to remember hip hop listens to all genres. That's why it incorporates a lot of that. So like the song says, setting that tone.
Yeah. And I mean, you hear that in terms of the samples. Like hip hop is a true postmodern art form. It pulls from the past. It pulls eclectically from all types of music and mixes it up, and then creates something entirely new. And that's part of why, I mean, I just love the culture so much, because it brings different elements together in surprising ways, and in ways that just also feel right. So yeah, man, that's part of what I think Flow does well too. Is it captures that energy of the culture in a really clear and magical and precise way that is accessible too. So it's an authentic piece. So like people who have grown up in hip hop culture will definitely appreciate it, but it's not so raw that if you're not from hip hop culture, you'll say, well, what the hell's going on here?
100%.
You'll also understand it because the storytelling is just so good.
Yeah.
Totally agree.
All right, so let me ask you a last question before we kind of like see what the audience is curious about. It's a play about storytelling, and about like generations of storytellers and a kind of tradition of storytelling. And often in the theater we describe ourselves as storytellers. But I have to imagine that like working on it, it leads you to reflect on what it means to tell stories in the way we do, and also like the kind of right now of it, like what does it mean like in this time and during a pandemic, and during a moment of like real sort of nationwide soul searching about race and who we are. So and those themes are just baked into the play. So what did it have you thinking about? I guess.
Yeah. I'll start, man. like it makes me think about just sort of the primordial function of story and its significance to us as people. I mean, now that we're in a, hopefully we're in the tail, it looks like we're in the tail end of this pandemic. There's light now at the end of the tunnel. So we're moving out of it and into a different phase. But, binging television and watching all of these stream shows. I mean, those are stories now that we need, and those stories are helping us get through the pandemic. So I think the essential nature of story has been sort of magnified for me, and it's very close to food, clothing, shelter in terms of what we need, because without story, your mental health starts to crumble. And like many people now are using art as a sort of refuge to kind of go into and to really sort of protect their mental health right now. So it's made me think about how important not only stories are, how and about how
You're like, we lost some of that again. You were in another nice kind of thought. It was like a thoughtful freeze this time.
Am I back?
Yeah, you're kind of back.
Okay. Yeah.
But like the sort of last strand of your thought, we lost.
Okay. Yeah, no, it just makes me think about how essential stories are, and how stories are like the signposts that lead us toward human progress.
Yeah. To piggyback off what Sam said, the story relies on storytellers and griots. So griots obviously were the storytellers who pass stories through the generations without paper and pen. But like Sam said, we're moving into the digital age. So it's that perfect segue, because that's literally where we're going with our storytelling now. So I feel like that's very essential.
Yeah. All right. We got a few questions coming in from people who are tuning in. So I'm going to ask you a couple of these. Okay. Somebody's curious about kind of hip hop theater today, especially with Hamilton.
Yeah.
And how you see hip hop theater changing. What different ways does hip hop theater look now? I don't know. It's sort of like, how time limited do you imagine the genre, and how much do you see it evolving?
Yeah. It's funny now with now that we're filming so much, we're able to pull inspiration from the visual language of hip hop that we see now in hip hop videos, and we've seen those for years and years and years. And now as theater artists, I feel like we're able to pull, inspiration from those in ways that are more direct and a little bit more urgent now, because it's like, well, we have to, because that's the same medium that we're telling stories in now. But in terms of how it's changed, I mean, I haven't seen all of Hamilton yet, but from what I've seen, that's certainly on the line in terms of like you can basically trace Hamilton, or go from Hamilton and go all the way back to Flow, a piece that was one of the first pieces to entirely be performed and written in hip hop verse. Yeah. So that was sort of one of the earliest pieces that I know that successfully did that on a certain level. So, I mean, for Hamilton to do it sort of made perfect sense. Like, well, of course, now we're going to do like this big ensemble piece that also does that. But I think hip hop theater is still wide open. So it depends on what the artists are going to do. It's as limited or as expansive as the imagination of the artists who are making it.
Yeah. Good. Hey, Nick, before we actually moved on to questions, and by the way, anybody who's tuning in, you can feel free to type questions into the chat and we can look at them. I think you brought along something to play.
Hey, I sure did. We would have to
give us an intro.
And yeah, and make sure you can tell me you can hear it. So, okay. What I find very interesting when I remember watching the previous flow, I know that he had almost like a theme song, and it was when he was talking about the 7 storytellers. So I approached with the same aesthetic, that I wanted to have a similar like vibe, but then I realized I didn't want to play the same track throughout. So I didn't want it to sound the exact same every time we heard it. And he talks about these 7 storytellers. So I did something different. Like Sam said, this is our second time doing a virtual piece, so I decided to do work in a different way. Normally, I would compose a beat or a track, and I would give them all to Sam. He would write to him or listen to him and give me his feedback. But this time, I've actually taken songs and I've broken them down by every instrument. Something I've never done before, but I had time to do it because of what's going on in the pandemic. It's one of those things. You ever have a project and you're like, I'm gonna get to it, I'm gonna try it out, I'm gonna work on it, and you never get to it. So during the pandemic, I was actually able to do it. So instead of giving Sam a whole track, I able to have instruments on every single different track to mix in. So what I would do is when he had one character, I would play just the bass line. And then when another character walks in, we have the piano and bass line. And then when Will is moving, the main character, and talking, the drums drop. So that gives you a lot more energy, a lot more flow. You're like, I did that. So with that being said, that was the I guess the inspiration and the layout of how I approach these tracks. So with that being said, this is part of the 7 theme, we like to call it. So this is when he's talking about the 7 storytellers in the show. Here you'll hear some bass lines and some slight keys. This is royalty-free composition, so none of this is taken from records, which is my actually base. I'm a sample-based producer. I love using vinyl records to make songs, but this was not the case for this piece. Like I said, try something new, original compositions. So here we go. This is the 7th theme, and this is what you would see when artists would talk. So he would be talking or doing some type of blocking or stage direction in this. And like I said, we would do the same thing. So that same motif, the same instruments and sounds that you hear. And then when there'll be movement, it'd be more like this. So see a lot of the same drive, but with more movement. Hip hop feel, obviously, from the drums, break beats, but so see, same exact track. And then with the other characters, we were able to do the same thing. Each character definitely has a different mood. We have a character there named Preacher Man, so he definitely has like a more like Sunday churchy vibe. So you definitely like, you know, messing around on the grand piano. And you know, it's weird. I get people ask me all the time, like, "Oh, you can play the piano? You can do that? You can play this?" And the thing is, everything is digital now and virtual. If you said this 15 years ago, they're like, "You're not a musician," but now everybody, even the most popular musicians you could think of, are composing on their computer. So it's taking a lot of the, and no disrespect to the people who go to Juilliard, like love it. Remember, hip hop is definitely built from out of nothing, and it always has been. So in keeping that alive, it's definitely starting from scratch and just working more with emotion and feeling. So I noticed somebody asked me what are some songs and artists that we would put on the flow playlist. So it's interesting. A lot of the people I just named, including Far Side, which I said in hieroglyphics, but then even some non-hip hop groups. There's a group called Hiatus Coyote. If you're not familiar, I would definitely check them out. They're definitely like a neo soul, blending genres with R&B, hip hop, rock. And once again, like I said, that's always been an aesthetic of me and Psalm because being that Psalm is from Brooklyn, he understands how the punk rock and the hip hop scene were totally related. So it's a lot of like do it yourself, self expression, rebel against authority. Like you can go on and on with the comparisons, believe it or not. So Hiatus Coyote, we definitely played a lot of shout outs to Matt who did the sound engineering because he was a big fan of Dougie Fresh, he told me. So we made sure to play some Dougie Fresh and beatboxing. And then there was moments in the show where they had beatboxing for the characters. And me and Psalm, we made a executive decision to almost update certain parts like that because yes, it's very rooted in 2003 when the story was, but I still wanted to make it updated and modern to today. So here's another quick track right here of Sweet Pea. She is how old is Sweet Pea, the character, Psalm? Do you remember?
Teenagers, 16, 17, yeah.
So a 16-year-old girl who freestyles with her friends. But like I said, the original piece had a beatbox, so we decided to go a little bit more hip hop percussive. Think about the 2000s, 90s. Obviously, like people in a circle in a cypher rapping outside. Because around
this is a more like a grittier sort of beat that you would hear at like an underground club too. So it's sort of like even with like the sounds of the music that Nick brought to the table, we thought about sort of what it evoked and what worlds in hip hop did it seem to bring to the surface too, and that was part of our process too.
Absolutely. And just to add one more piece of inspiration or to the playlist, somebody asked me, I would definitely say Reflection Eternal. And if you don't know who that is, that's High Tech and Talib Kweli. And the reason why them specifically is because they are a DJ, producer, storyteller duo. So it definitely translated when I was trying to make tracks for this piece.
And and they're artists who were mentioned in the piece by name, Melly Mel, Cool Mo D, Joski Love, right? So yeah, so there's certain
Most Def
artists and musicians who were named, and so I mean I think after people watch the piece, then they can sort of go back and sort of say, okay, now I'll listen to, like, the playlist is actually like embedded in the piece itself. So that's also a cool thing.
And what's beautiful is you can watch this without no prior knowledge of hip hop. So that's great as well.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. Hearing you guys talk, I have like just a kind of design and aesthetic question. Because it sounds like, Nick, so you're working digitally, and you've got the production that you're not really updating. So like, the vibe of your kind of life presence on stage, whatever, 20 something years, it wouldn't have been so digital. So like, what do we see? Do you know what I mean? Does it look like you're dealing with vinyl?
And Tom had a great
that's a great like dramaturgical question, because I asked Nick that too. I said, because Nick, and I'll let Nick speak about this, but with his equipment, I said, well, what year was this made? Like, was this out in 2003? Because it has to sort of match up, and then Nick can take it from there.
And my direct answer was MP3s were out. Because we live in a world now where we're so familiar with MP3s, like they've always been here, when technically they didn't come out till like the age of Napster, which wasn't until like 99, 98, really, when you think about it. So with that being said, with the piece being rooted in like 2001 or 2003, I told some like they were using MP3, so I have to bring crates of vinyl. But we kept that aesthetic when you see the piece, because there's vinyl present as part of my actual backdrop or where I'm located in these scenes. So we still kept the vinyl because that is the DJ, and it's still the same movements and such. But being digital, we are manipulating and working with MP3s now, which is interesting, but it's definitely an evolution that's needed as well.
Yeah, good. Here's a final question that I'll ask you just to kind of wrap things up. I'm curious about it too, because we've talked about kind of like musical inspiration and we've talked about kind of the design of the thing. Somebody's asking a question about like video inspiration.
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
like 90s hip hop or
Yep.
hip hop in the early 2000s. And like,
Yep.
was that something you looked at in a way to sort of figure out the visual vocabulary?
It was, and I mean, it was like certain videos, like Gas Face by Third Base. We definitely looked at that, and they're actually like some shots that we sort of, you know, did similar things to. Far Side, Passing Me By. I Got It Made by Special Ed, right? So these were sort of videos that were sort of like iconic videos that I wanted to go back and look at and see what parts of them we like. Some of these things we could not duplicate, like in the Far Side piece. I mean, they're like hanging upside down at one point and they're like floating across the screen. So of course we couldn't necessarily do that, but we were inspired to think about different visual approaches that would be surprising or just like cool and interesting.
And naturally, I like to throw out there what I get when I see the composition is like very Eric B. and Rakim vibes, like the DJ, somebody in front, and then Gangstar. So just a whole bunch of 90s influence as far as the look goes. But like I said, the sound, we kind of teetered amongst the decades, which was great.
Yeah. Cool. It's fascinating to hear you guys talk about this.
Cool.
And I can't wait to see it. It's so weird, this, you know, like I just must be what it's like to be a real audience member. Like I just kind of wait till it happens and sort of watching it evolve in these steps. So I'm desperately curious to figure out what you guys have come up with, and I can't wait to see it.
Cool.
So thank you both.
Thank you. Thanks for having us. Appreciate it.
I'm going to welcome on Bianca Beckham, who's our Director of Development at Studio, to see us out.
Hello, everyone. I want to thank Psalm and Nick for being with us this evening. I want to give them a nice virtual round of applause. That was just such a fun conversation, and I can really feel the authenticity, Nick. So it's there, the chemistry is there, and you guys are going to just create something beautiful. I can't wait to see it. And thank you to all of you for joining us this evening as well. And if you would like to hear more from Psalm, Nick, and others from the Flow Creative team, please tune in on Wednesday, June 2nd at 7 p.m. for a featured discussion in partnership with DC Public Library. This event will be broadcast live on the DCPL Facebook page, and you will also look to Studio's social media posts for updates on the event. I also hope you'll be able to join us for our final inside look of the season on Thursday, June 3rd at 6 p.m. We will be welcoming tender age playwright George Brandt to talk about his new play. Thank you again for joining us this evening, and just have a wonderful rest of your night. Thanks again for being here. Good night.